The last summer of peace died quietly. London, August 1939. The city still breathed as if nothing had changed, though the headlines screamed that everything had. Cafe windows glowed softly through the fog, the chatter of evening crowds drowned by the rustle of newspapers announcing, "Germany invades Poland." Somewhere a street violin played a tune no one was listening to. That's when I received the envelope. Cream-colored, unmarked, slipped under my apartment door. Inside, a single line written in neat type. "Report to Vauxhall Cross, bring nothing." At the SIS office, I met a man whose face I've never forgotten. Gray suit, gray eyes, gray voice. He asked me about my language skills, my travels, my loyalty. Then, without a word of ceremony, he slid a false passport across the table. The name read, Hans Müller, born in Bremen, occupation, trade clerk. My old life, my books, my friends. All of it ended with that single paper. "You'll be sent to Paris first," he said. "Observe, listen, send what you learn. And if I'm caught?" He looked at me almost kindly. "Then you were never here." That night I burned my birth certificate in the sink and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. The room filled with the smell of scorched ink, the scent of a man being erased. Outside, the church bells rang, echoing through the city like a warning from another world. On the first day of September, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain declared war. I stood among the crowd outside 10 Downing Street as the Prime Minister's voice crackled over the radio. "We are at war with Germany." Some wept, others cheered. I felt nothing, only the strange calm of someone who has already crossed a line. Before dawn, I boarded a ferry from Dover under my new name. The Channel wind was cruel, carrying the salt and smoke of something immense approaching. I stared back at the receding coast of England, the cliffs glowing faintly in the gray morning light. Behind me lay the world I had known. Ahead, only deception, danger, and silence. As the ship's horn moaned through the fog, a thought struck me. Spies don't die once. They die in pieces. Each lie, each face, each forgotten name, another quiet burial. And so began my war. Paris, June 1940. The city had surrendered without a scream. German banners now hung from the same balconies where lovers once kissed. The air smelled of diesel, cigarettes, and quiet defeat. I arrived a week after the occupation began, blending into the flood of refugees and traders crossing through the chaos. My new life began above a small bakery on Rue des Martyrs, a perfect cover, the scent of bread masking the ink and static of my hidden radio set. Each morning I played my role, the polite, soft-spoken Herr Müller, importer of industrial parts. By night I became Wren, the silent voice on a frequency that didn't officially exist. My job was to listen, to map the enemy's pulse through whispers, letters, and gestures. Information moved like blood through the arteries of a dying continent. My reports went out in code, train schedules disguised as flower orders, troop movements written between lines of poetry. But fear was thicker than the Seine. Every knock on the door felt like judgment. The Gestapo were not men, they were shadows that moved in daylight. Once, I watched them drag a bookseller from his shop for owning banned literature. No one spoke as his screams faded down the street. That silence taught me more about power than any briefing ever had. Sometimes, late at night, I'd stand at my window and watch the Eiffel Tower glowing dimly under blackout regulations. It looked less like a symbol of beauty, and more like a skeleton, a monument to what France had lost. Still, life went on. People queued for bread, whispered prayers in churches, smiled when they needed to. Even the occupation had its rhythm, and within that rhythm, I hid. I sent my 5th report to London in early autumn. The coded message read simply, "Winter approaches. The city breathes, but not freely." I didn't know if anyone would ever read it. Some nights I wondered if England even remembered us, the ghosts planted in foreign soil. Yet, despite the fear, there were moments of strange beauty. A cafe owner who slipped me extra sugar. A child who saluted passing soldiers with wooden toys. The resilience of ordinary lives under extraordinary cruelty. By December, I'd learned to wear 2 faces. the one that smiled at soldiers and the one that trembled behind closed doors. That was the true craft of espionage, not gathering secrets, but surviving the performance. And every night before turning off my hidden transmitter, I whispered the same words into the dark. Still alive, still unseen. By 1942, Paris had grown used to its captivity. The war had turned every street into a secret, every silence into a story. The once lively cafes were filled with uniforms instead of laughter. The city breathed, but only because its occupiers allowed it to. I had survived 2 years behind enemy lines. My code name was still Ren, but the man beneath the alias was fading. The war changes you slowly, like frost creeping through glass. I no longer dreamed in English. My thoughts came in whispers of German and French. Sometimes I wondered if I'd ever find my way back to the man I once was. That's when I met Elise. She was a nurse at a small medical post near Montmartre, caring for both wounded civilians and German soldiers. Her eyes carried a quiet strength, the kind forged by loss. She offered me shelter one night when curfew caught me in the open. Her kindness was disarming. I told myself I wouldn't return, but I did. Again and again, we spoke of music, of books, of the Paris that used to exist. And somewhere between the lies I told and the truths I avoided, I began to trust her. She became my only human refuge in a city of suspicion. Then in February I noticed things. Questions she shouldn't have asked. A look that lingered when I hid my papers. I ignored it. Love, or something close to it, makes you blind. The betrayal came on a cold morning. I arrived at her flat with a coded message to transmit. The door was ajar. Inside, 2 Gestapo officers stood beside her. Elise didn't look at me, her eyes fixed on the floor. One officer reached for his pistol. Instinct saved me. I threw the radio case through the window, dove after it, and landed in the snow below as bullets cracked through the air. I ran through the narrow streets, breath burning, every echo behind me a ghost of death. I didn't stop until I reached the catacombs, the city's dark veins where no one searched. There, in the cold silence, I realized what every spy eventually learns. Trust is a luxury we can't afford. I left Paris that night with forged papers and nothing else. Elise's face haunted every step. They say betrayal is the sharpest knife because it comes from the hand you hold. By 1943, France had learned to whisper in defiance. The German flag still hung over government buildings, but underground, in basements, barns, and candlelit tunnels, another France had begun to breathe. It wasn't a country of borders anymore. It was a heartbeat, pulsing through those who refused to bow. After Elise's betrayal, I vanished into that heartbeat. My new name was Marcel Delacroix, a railway worker from Lyon. In truth, I was a ghost, a spy without a country, a man kept alive by secrets. Through a contact in the resistance, I found a network that carried more courage than any army I'd ever known. They called themselves les mains libres, the free hands. We were tailors, farmers, school teachers, people who risked everything for a word whispered too loudly. My task was sabotage. I learned to dismantle train lines by lamplight, to replace timetables with lies, to scatter chaos like dust. We didn't fight with bullets. We fought with patience. Every operation was a game with death. I remember one night, March 1944, when we derailed a German ammunition convoy near Dijon. The explosion lit the sky like dawn. We watched from the hills as soldiers scrambled, shouting into the darkness. For a brief moment, the sound of fire felt like freedom. But the victories were small, and the losses vast. I watched friends vanish one by one, taken by the Gestapo, their names erased from existence. We buried them in shallow graves beneath apple trees, marked only by stones. I stopped asking how long I could last. In June, a coded message arrived through our radio. The invasion begins Normandy. D-Day. The words carried more power than gunfire. The Allies had returned. Hope, fragile, trembling, began to spread like wildfire. German patrols tightened, searching every road, every barn. We knew liberation was near, but it would not come without blood. The last transmission I sent before the retreat read, "France is waking. We will hold until the light returns." And hold we did. Through rain and ruin, through hunger and loss. By August, the sound of tanks filled the streets. The city that had once surrendered began to fight again. Paris was no longer silent. The war ended not with a shout, but with a sigh. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. The bells of Paris rang for the first time in years, echoing through streets once patrolled by fear. I stood among the crowds on the Champs-Élysées, watching tears stream down faces I didn't know. Flags waved like beating hearts. Strangers kissed, soldiers laughed. The sky bloomed with fireworks instead of bombs, but I didn't celebrate. I couldn't. My war had ended months earlier, quietly without parades. In January, the resistance cell I'd worked with was dissolved. Half of us were dead, the rest scattered like ash in the wind. When Paris was liberated, I emerged from hiding, but no one was waiting. My false papers had become my only identity. The man named Thomas Alcott, the linguist, the dreamer, had long since died in the silence of 1939. London called me back that summer. The city was scarred, its skyline stitched with cranes and grief. I reported to the same gray building at Vauxhall Cross where it had all begun. My superior, a man I barely recognized, read my final report, stamped it, and said only, "You served well." Then he closed the file marked Wren and locked it away. That was the last time anyone spoke my code name. I walked along the Thames that evening, the river glimmering beneath a pale sunset. Around me, life was returning. Lovers on benches, children tossing bread to swans. I watched them, wondering what it felt like to belong again. I had spent 6 years in shadows. Daylight now felt foreign. Sometimes, when the wind carried the faint smell of smoke and iron, I thought I heard the whispers of those who hadn't come home. The voices of Elise, of the men I buried, of all who had lived and died in silence. Their ghosts lingered in every streetlight, every quiet room. People think spies live for adventure. They're wrong. We live so others don't have to. But in the end, when the mission ends and the world forgets your name, what remains? I left my last report on a park bench near the embankment, unsigned, unread. It ended with the only truth I had left. Some wars end, others simply fade into memory. And with that, I walked into the London fog, a man who never was. If the truth had to be buried so that peace could live, would you still choose to be the one holding the shovel?